Good morning, gorgeous. Yes, you. Welcome back to Rosie, Rooted and Rising. Today's episode will not be edited because editing is not in my wheelhouse and it's not coming over as clearly as it should when you hear the podcast. So tell me what you think in the comments about this unedited version, and you should know me well enough by now that my feelings would not be hurt by your honesty. So, I'm really glad you're back here with me today. Wherever you're listening from this morning, whether you're driving, walking, getting ready for work, sitting quietly with your coffee, or simply trying to catch your breath before the day fully starts, thank you for being here. I do not take your time lightly. And I think today's conversation is going to speak to a very specific kind of woman. The woman who has outgrown a room she once fought very hard to belong in. Let's get to it. Today's episode is titled, What Happens When Growth Threatens the Room? I want to talk about something today that I think a lot of women experience, but very few women say out loud, honestly. Sometimes the hardest part about growth is realizing the room you are standing in has no intention of growing with you. And that realization is painful when you are someone who genuinely cares. Not someone looking for attention, not someone trying to undermine people, not someone trying to take over, just someone who sees possibility, someone who sees solutions, someone who naturally thinks about how things could function better, healthier, stronger, more effectively. And that has been me for most of my life. For years, I worked at DCP&P, actually 15 years. And despite everything people said about those systems, I genuinely cared about the families. I cared about the children. I cared about the work. I was not the kind of worker who simply wanted to clock in and out emotionally. That wasn't me. If I saw something that could help people, I spoke up about it. If I saw inefficiencies, I thought about solutions. If I saw gaps in leadership, in training, accountability, my mind naturally started thinking about how things could improve. And for a long time, I thought that's what leadership wanted too. I really did. But one of the hardest lessons adulthood teaches you is this: not every environment actually wants growth, even when they publicly say they do. Some environments only want maintenance. Some systems become so accustomed to dysfunction that dysfunction becomes part of the culture itself. And people try to improve the culture become the disruption. Let me say that again. And people who try to improve the culture become the disruption. I remember one situation very clearly. I had been asked to go out with a new worker during their training, and when we arrived at the home, the worker literally did not know how to knock on the door. Now, I did not judge that worker, not at all. To me, that moment represented a training failure, not a personal failure. And I remember thinking, how many people are we sending into emotionally intense situations without proper guidance, observation, or support? So I started thinking proactively, as I do. I thought newer workers should have real world observation and mentorship. I thought someone should actually go out with them, observe how they handle situations, help guide them afterwards, and teach them things you cannot learn sitting behind a desk in training sessions. Not to criticize them, to strengthen them. Because this work impacts real people, vulnerable people. I care deeply about that. So I brought ideas to leadership over the years, several times. Not aggressively, not disrespectfully. Actually, I approached it collaboratively. collaboratively. I even told them they could take the credit for the ideas if it meant positive change would happen. This is how committed I was to the mission itself. Let me say that again. This is how committed I was to the mission itself. But every single time, the response was some version of, "We are already working on that, Rosie." And after hearing that several times, I realized something painful. They were not working on it. Nothing changed, nothing improved, nothing evolved. And what became clear to me over time was that my leadership made insecure leadership uncomfortable. Let me say that again. I realized, and it became clear to me over time, that my leadership made insecure leadership uncomfortable. That was difficult to accept because I was not trying to compete with anybody. I was trying to contribute. I was trying to make a difference. But weak leadership often experiences initiatives as threat instead of support, especially in an environment where survival, politics, cliques, and self-preservation have become more important than the actual mission itself. And yes, there were cliques, grown adults, leadership included. And I remember thinking how dangerous that is in an environment responsible for helping vulnerable people. Because once protecting positions becomes more important than protecting the mission, the culture starts decaying from the inside out. And that is exactly what I was watching happen. Now, let me pause here because this episode is not just about government work. This is about life. Because many women listening right now are sitting in rooms that no longer align with who they are becoming. Some of you are sitting in workplaces where accountability makes people uncomfortable. Some of you are in friendships where your growth is treated like distance. Some of you are in relationships where your standards suddenly became too much the moment you stopped overextending yourself. And some of you are sitting in family systems where dysfunction has been normalized for so long that healthy communication feels threatening to people. And one of the hardest realities to accept is this: growth changes relationship dynamics. Not everyone benefits from your evolution. That is real. The healthier you become, the harder it becomes to participate in environments built on denial, avoidance, inconsistency, manipulation, or emotional immaturity. Because once your awareness shifts, your tolerance shifts with it. And that happened to me. Toward the end of my years there, I started realizing I was emotionally exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the workload. It was the exhaustion of caring deeply inside systems that no longer seemed interested in honest growth. That kind of exhaustion is different. Because when you care, you keep trying. You keep hoping. You keep thinking maybe this conversation will finally matter. Maybe this person will finally listen to me. Maybe leadership will finally prioritize the mission over image. But eventually, reality forces you to confront something difficult. You cannot heal a system committed to protecting its dysfunction. Let me say that again. That was a mess. You cannot heal a system committed to protecting its dysfunction. That's wild. I think a lot of women lose years of their life trying to fix environments that have no intention of changing. That is true professionally, personally, emotionally. Some women stay in relationships trying to love someone into accountability. Some stay in friendships trying to carry all the emotional maturity for both people. Some stay in jobs where innovation is punished instead of encouraged. And what makes it painful is that high capacity women usually stay longer because they see potential. They see what something could become. But maturity eventually teaches you something important. Potential means nothing without willingness. Nothing changes without willingness. Not leadership, not relationships, not families, and not organizations. And I think one of the biggest shifts that happened for me was realizing loyalty can quietly become self-betrayal if you are not careful. That sentence took me years to understand fully because women are often praised for loyalty, for endurance, for staying, for sacrificing, for carrying different situations without complaint. But nobody really talks about the emotional damage that happens when you continue staying in places your spirit already knows no longer fits you. Your body feels it first. You become emotionally drained more quickly. You dread conversations. You start shrinking yourself to avoid tension. You stop bringing ideas because you already know they will go nowhere. You become quieter, not because you lost intelligence, but because you became tired of speaking into environments resistant to truth. That happened to me, and it was one of the saddest parts, realizing I still loved the mission. I loved helping families move forward. I loved helping people navigate different seasons. I loved seeing progress. But leadership was no longer aligned with the values they publicly claimed to represent. And once I saw that clearly, I could not unsee it anymore. That awareness changes you because eventually you stop asking, how do I survive here? And you start asking, what is this environment costing me emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and professionally? That is a very different question. And I think many women over 50 begin asking deeper questions because by this stage of life, peace starts mattering differently. Let me say that again. And I think many women over 50 begin asking deeper questions because by this stage of life, peace starts mattering differently. Not shallow peace, not avoidance, alignment. You begin wanting your internal life and external life to match more honestly. You stop wanting to constantly perform well while privately carrying frustration, resentment, exhaustion, or disappointment. I believe this is why so many women reinvent themselves in this season of life. Not because they are impulsive, not because they are lost, because they finally become honest. Honest about what no longer fits, honest about what no longer aligns, honest about where they have outgrown the room. At this point in my life, this scripture means something very different to me than it used to. Isaiah 43:19 LIV says, see, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? And I think sometimes we read scriptures about new things while still trying to force ourselves to stay inside environments that are spiritually, emotionally, and mentally draining us. Sometimes the new thing cannot fully emerge because we are still overcommitted to rooms that no longer align with who we are becoming. That was me in 2021. I realized I could no longer sit in a system I had worked hard to uplift while watching leadership repeatedly choose dysfunction over growth. I could not continue pretending that this is just how things are because I do not believe things improve by pretending problems do not exist. I think emotionally mature people struggle deeply in stagnant environments because growth minded people naturally think about improvement. They naturally think of they naturally ask questions, they naturally see solutions, they naturally care about impact. And unfortunately, insecure systems often experience those people as threats instead of assets. That lesson changed the way I view leadership forever because leadership is not a title. Leadership is not control. Leadership is not protecting your position. Leadership is not surrounding yourself with people who never challenge the room. Real leadership creates space for truth, accountability, growth, collaboration, and better outcomes. Weak leadership fears exposure. Strong leadership welcomes improvement. There is a difference, and I think women need to hear this clearly. If your growth threatens the room, that does not automatically mean you are the problem. Sometimes your growth exposes the limitations of the environment itself. Oof, I gotta say that again. Sometimes your growth exposes the limitations of the environment itself. That distinction matters because many women internalize resistance as failure. They think, maybe I'm asking for too much. Maybe I should stay quiet. Maybe I should stop pushing. But sometimes your discomfort is actually discernment trying to wake you up. Sometimes your frustration is revealing misalignment. Sometimes your exhaustion is revealing that you have outgrown the environment emotionally before you physically leave it. That is wisdom. And leaving was not easy for me. Walking away from 15 years was emotional. There was grief attached to it, fear attached to it, uncertainty attached to it. Because starting over later in life is humbling. People talk about reinvention like it's glamorous. They rarely talk about how vulnerable it feels while you are standing in the middle of in the middle. Let me say that again. They rarely talk about how vulnerable it feels while you are standing in the middle of uncertainty trying to rebuild yourself. But I can tell you this now. Leaving that environment gave me back parts of myself I did not realize I had been suppressing to survive there. My creativity returned, my clarity returned, my leadership returned, and my vision returned. And most importantly, my peace returned. Not instantly, but gradually. Because peace is not just the absence of conflict. It's not. Peace is what peace is what happens when your spirit no longer has to fight itself every day just to function in an environment that no longer aligns with who you are. That realization changed my life. And maybe someone listening today needs to hear this. You are not required to spend the rest of your life shrinking yourself to fit rooms that refuse to grow. Not professionally, not emotionally, not spiritually. Some rooms are assignments, some are seasons, some are lessons. But not every room is meant to become your permanent home, and maturity is learning the difference. If today's episode resonated with you, follow the show, leave a review, and share it with another woman who's rising or someone in your life who needs it. Follow on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And if you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening on YouTube, like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next on the unedited Rosie, Rooted, and Rising. Until next time, sis y hermana, stay rooted, stay blessed, and keep rising. New episodes every Monday morning.